Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well. You've made it halfway through your fantasy footy season. We are at the next block of buys over the next 4 weeks. Teams will miss 1 week. You will have 18 players on field that scores will count. In AFL Fantasy, you'll have up to 3 trades a week, while in Supercoach and Dream Team, you can use 3 trades, let alone if you've got any boosts left. But there is a ton of stuff we've got to talk about at this middle junction of the season. I want to talk about trade targets. I want to talk about creative trading, how we process our bench hygiene, what do we do with poor performers, and a bunch of other stuff. But joining me on this episode, as he has right over not only this season, but the past season ahead of that too, regular part of the Coaches Panel, it's MiniMonk. Hello, mate. How are you? You've made it halfway through the season, and only another half of pain to go, depending on the format you want to focus on. But we're talking AFL Fantasy on this episode.
I've had my extended break. I've had my Jordan Sweet rest for 2 weeks off, and I'm back and I'm ready to give it one more week until I'm subbed off again for the next up and comer. No, we'll see how we go. It's good to be back. It's good to be chatting AFL Fantasy despite the year that I'm having. But, you can have your ups and you can have your downs. It's all about having fun at the end of the day.
100%. That's the great coaches. All it takes is 1 or 2 variables to go not your way. And with so many strong players in the community at the moment, maybe you're looking at your ranking halfway through the season going, it's got a 2 in front of it, and I've got 4 other numbers behind it. I've never been this low. Here's the thing. Arguably, the competition has never been so densely strong at the top end, more than ever before, with so many great content creators, so many good coaches now paying a lot of attention to it. So let's help coaches navigate their way through this mid-season buy this week. MiniMonk, very simply, best 18 is on the cards. You can have 3 trades available to you this week, depending on whether you do it in the app or in the PC or web-based browser. There's a few little tricks of the trade to get you there, but we will not have any Swans. We will not have any Lions. We will not have any Roos, and we will not have any Giants. Here's a few things to help you. If it's your first mid-season buy, or you've forgotten what happened early in the year, you can put them on field, you can trade them out, you can undo that at various points in time through the weekend, no problem at all. They're only locked as the final game of the round starts, and they're a very simple, easy way to do your captaincy and vice captaincy loopholes, because the moment you put it on them, it picks up straight away. So it just gives you that little indicator to play around early. If you're like, oh, do I want to take my 105 early in the round that you might get from a day cost type, you can just get that look and feel and see what it does. So those are the teams we're missing out on. Is there a line that it feels like it could be the most painful? To me, I go straight to that forward line, MiniMonk, and arguably 3 of the 4 most popular in terms of top scoring in Powell, Zorko, Heaney. Geez, we could be rolling through some 40s and 50s through there at best in the forward line. That feels like the line that the most pain could come for us.
I definitely agree. It's the line where it feels the most painful. Thankfully, it's the line where we've been getting the most amount of rookies recently as well. Types of Frazier. We did have Riches. Unfortunately, he's now injured for a month, which is a very unfortunate for the coaches. So hopefully you got your 94 score off of him last week. But definitely that forward line is where it's going to be the most painful. Heaney and Powell, a lot of people have a Zorko. A lot of people even might still have a James Jordan. They might have gone for a Toby Green. They might have a Zane Dersmer as a rookie. Cadman, Darcy Jones, who's injured now as well. Like, there is just a lot of really relevant players that are going to be missing out of our forward lines. The good thing is the balance is there's not as many across the other lines as well. If you look at the defenders, you're probably looking at the likes of Harry Sheezel and Lucky Whitfield as the big 2. Yep. And in the midfield, probably got 1 from each line, really. If you're going, you've got Goulden, you've got Warner from the Swans. From the Lions, you've got a few people that have got Dunkley. North Melbourne, it's probably just an LDU. Maybe you've gone a Wardlaw. Maybe you also have a McKercher down back. And then from the GWS, it's probably just a Tom Green that's relevant at this stage in the midfield. And then you've also got Tristan Cherry in your ruck for a lot of coaches that are still running with him there.
Yeah, does feel like a little bit of pain. In a moment, I want to get your take to help coaches creatively look at maybe specifically these 4 clubs for a moment, how they and other options can creatively help us either get better playing options on field this week, maximize some cash generation and some scoring power. So I'm keen on your take. But before we get there, it is a weird portion of the season because right about now, traditionally it's after the buys, we get a really good indicator of where our team is ranked. But if you're nowhere in the top handful of thousands, you're no chance at this point in time, just given how good the top end quality of the AFL fantasy coach is, how similar teams are, how many chasing points you've got to get. It's really hard to make up more than 100 or so points every week from now. It's doable, but with rookie roulette not as volatile for us on field, it does get hard. So coaches that are sort of ranked 10 to 15,000 back, well, that's not happening for you in 2024. You could still have a good rank, but that's not happening for you, let alone winning yourself a car. So for those that ranking is their focus, different with leagues, obviously, if they're looking at it going, I'm not getting a good rank and maybe not a career high rank, how should they be approaching not just these buys, but the back half of the season, knowing that rankings is not going to work out for them in 2024? What should they be doing? Because they can very easily lose interest in AFL fantasy and become a bit of a ghost ship.
Find a way to have fun with the game. Find the way that brings you the joy in the game, or learn. Try and gain information about how you play the game. I know Rids is a big proponent of this, and if you're not having a good season, try things that you wouldn't normally try, see if they work, see if they don't, and use it as a learning opportunity for next year. Or bring in players that you like to watch. You know, we've had a few players returning off of injury in the last couple of weeks that a lot of people have as club favorites, be it a Will Day or a Jordan Ridley. See if they're a good player to bring in, see what they can bring to your team. They come in at discounted prices. They could be ones to have a look at. You know, it's all about, in the scheme of things, whether you, no matter how you want to play the game, it's about playing the game in terms of the way that you get enjoyment from it. If you get enjoyment from a good rank and you're not having a great year, yeah, it's a year. Sometimes it happens. You might have had a couple of dud picks that just didn't work out. Doesn't matter. You can just use it as a learning opportunity for next year. And, you know, people have down years. You know, clubs have down years where suddenly they're 15th, 16th on the ladder, and the next year they're up in the top 2 or 3. You could do the exact same as a coach. Experiment, because that's exactly what a team would do in the AFL as well.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, because politely, it could be the difference between 3 or 4 selection moves of players you've traded in or out of or held on to, 2 or 3 rookie roulettes and 1 or 2 vice captaincy or captaincy calls going your way. And all of a sudden it's 1,000-point differential. And that there alone makes the difference. It's not that much that makes the difference, but when it builds over a 3-month period, like it has been now for the season, that's where you kind of go, all right, season's out for me here.
I mean, you know, you've got probably the perfect example in the graphic in the bottom in Connor Rosie. I mean, he's going 112 to start the season over the first 5 weeks and is looking like an absolute smash pick. And then all of a sudden he has a poor matchup against Collingwood. Can be excused, happens. The week after, he is absolutely killing it. He's on about 80 odd at halftime. Early on in the third quarter, twinges his hamstring. Only finishes on 89. Sits out the whole last quarter. Next game, they play him. Probably shouldn't have. He only gets a 50. Then he misses 2 games, and then he comes back and tweaks his ankle in the first 5 minutes of the game, and now might miss this week as well. If you held him like I did, it's just unlucky. Like you've probably done the right thing. You've tried to upgrade around him. You've tried to hope that he comes back and he comes back well, and he just hasn't. And it's put your season probably in a bit of a poorer state. But that happens. That's just the way the luck kind of falls in this game that we play. And you know, next year, he might not have had that tweak. Maybe it doesn't happen. Maybe he doesn't do his hammy. And instead of going and finishing on 89, he goes 120, and then he continues to go 110 for the rest of the season. But that's just how the cards can sometimes fall. And whether you're on the right side of luck or on the wrong side of it, it evens out in the long run. You just have to ride the ups and downs.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good shout. So let's help coaches, whether it be their season is done or those that are finding themselves in this middle junction of the year, knowing with 3 trades available every single week over the next month, you can get really aggressive here. You can make a lot of really interesting moves. I do want to talk about cash cows in a moment with you. But what are some creative ways we could look about generating some cash this week? We will look at some value options in a moment, but we do have these clubs that are off. Are there any players specifically from either Sydney, Brisbane North, or GWS that you're looking at and you go, you know what? I might be able to flip you out this week, not just to get the extra body on field, but to generate a little bit of money. Are there any players that you look at that are on the buy this week that you could get a bit creative with how you make moves?
Look, I think Lachie Whitfield might be the one that a lot of coaches start to look at because he's still got a fair bit of cash in his head. He's been okay the last few weeks without being great, despite some pretty heavy attention. Yeah. But the issue is he's got the bye this week. He has a relatively friendly matchup the week after in Hawthorn. But then he comes into Port Adelaide, who is the most restrictive team for the position that he plays. And then he comes into an almost inevitable Jordan tag the week after. Because we've already seen it happen once, and we saw the score that happened with that. Yes, it was a weight game, but he held Whitfield to, I think it was no marks. He didn't take a single mark that game.
Yep.
And for someone whose scoring relies pretty heavily on handball receives and on +6 scoring chains, that could be another dirty 30 or a 40 out of Whitfield. And so that's one I would probably look at. Yes, I think that after that, you can probably look to bring him back in maybe a week or two after once his price is bottomed out. But he's definitely one I'd be interested in. I think the one that's a bit more interesting in terms of how you see it playing out is actually Harry Sheezel. Despite the role change, he's still been scoring well. But there is still concerns that things might change because he's been quite fortunate in those 2 games recently that he's actually been swung back for portions of them based on injuries that they've had. After the bye, Colin McCurch is probably going to come back into that team and he's going to eat up a lot of that back 6 pie, which Fisher has probably had basically to himself. We've also seen the likes of even Charlie Comben getting involved and Aiden Core getting involved. Darcy Tucker popped on the weekend. Yeah. Someone's going to have to lose out on that pie if McCurch is going to take a piece of it, and it really could be Harry Sheezel.
Yeah.
Despite that, the one who's being traded out by the majority of coaches this week is Tom Powell, and I'm not as keen on trading him out for a couple of reasons.
I agree.
One being that he's not at a massive price tag. It's not great. He's in the mid 600s, but what are you going to do with that? Like, where else are you going to go for the forwards that have got a role where they're at least playing like 40-50% midfield most weeks? I think that he's definitely someone who can build into the season and go on a bit of a tear, a la Taron Thomas a couple of years ago for North Melbourne. And their run home for the rest of the year is actually quite good for inside midfielders. So I'm not sure that he's one that I'd be looking to trade, but I can understand why coaches are looking at
it. Look, politely, outside of Flanders, Heaney, Zorko, Fisher's probably the only other forward at the moment in recent history that you go, I feel pretty confident that a 90 is my base-ish sort of score, even an 85, if we're honest. And most weeks, what are you trading Powell out for? On average, 10 points per game maximum upside, unless it's one of those 3. And again, Fisher's out this week. Heaney's out this week. Zorko's out this week. Like, it's Flanders, really. And if you're at the point without Flanders, then your season's
I think it might be symptomatic.
Like we talked about just moments ago, it's probably a little over.
It might be symptomatic of the lack of depth that people have in their forward lines. And they see, I've got Heaney on the bye, so I'm not going to trade him. I've got Zorko on the bye, I'm not going to trade him. I've got Fisher on the bye, I'm not going to trade him. Oh, I've got a 4th one in Powell, maybe I'll trade him instead. But, aside from
get rid of the worst of the 4, quote unquote.
Yeah. I mean, that one game against Adelaide where he was basically parked at full forward, he hasn't gone under 70, which it's not the worst. It's not the best, but it's not the worst either. And like I said, I think the run after the bye is pretty good for them.
Yeah, it certainly is. So how do we help people find some value options through these next couple of weeks? I know this is a weird week in many ways because you're not really looking to go up to the top end, guys. You absolutely can. There's multiple ways and reasons to do it. But normally you're trying to jump into these players off the buy. So for non-Tom Green owners, he's locked front and center for a number of reasons as a trade target next week. Connor Rosie, certainly maybe not round 14, maybe 15, will certainly be a heavily traded option. These are guys that have 110 potential, but variable things have got in them. So we've got these sort of middle rung kind of guys that can score like premiums, or we hope to score like premiums over a 3-week run. Who are some players that you think that we could look at trading into? More than likely, we're probably hoping have around 15 buy, I would suspect. But who are the players that maybe for a 3-week hit, the old school broadbent philosophy that Rid has introduced of a player that really, it's what daily fantasy is these days, isn't it? It's basically pick a guy with a good matchup, good value, good role, and good opponent against him that gives up points. You get those things together, that's who you should go and get. But who are some players you think could be good value prospects that we could look at as a 3-week run before we really get into some more upgrade cadence from next week?
So when you're looking to trade into players on the round 12 week, when, you know, it's 4 teams on the buy, everyone's still got a buy to come, I think they either have to fall into one of two categories. Either they have to be presenting so much value and they can present a potential to increase your team value or increase their price by 100K in a 2 to 3 week block, or they are a heavily discounted premium who can actually still match it with the top end of the season, or at least the top few, if not maybe the top 15, 20, say midfielders, or top 10 to 15 defenders, and at least act as a stopgap from now until the end of the buys. And if I'll look at the 4 options that you got on the screen here, and I'll read them off to the people that are listing online. You've got Will Day, you've got Alex Sexton, you've got Christian Salem, you've got Jordan Short. I think of those 4, the only one that fits into that latter category that can match it with the top end, I think, is Will Day. He's shown a lot in the few weeks that he's been back, and he's been building his time on ground. And not only has he shown it this season, he also showed it last season when he was injected into that midfield full time. And man, the Hawks look so much better with him playing in there. Their run is, I think, the second best run for inside midfielders from now until the end of the season. And I think their end of the season is just absolutely ridiculous in terms of like who they end up facing as well. I mean, the run from now until the round 17, round 18 point is Adelaide, GWS, who are now hit by a few injuries, so maybe that gets a bit easier. Richmond, then their bye, then West Coast, and then Geelong. There's a potential that Will Day exits round 17 and he's 900K. If you want to flip him at that point, it's a very easy move to make. Alex Sexton's a tricky one. I think his longevity is very much limited to when Will Powell comes back, and I think that's only a couple of weeks away now. It does feel like a bit of a hand grenade that you're sitting on, because any given week he could end up in the 2s, but he could also be, you know, dropping 100s on you and really painful for not owning. So he's one I'd consider. Jaden Short and Christian Salem are both very interesting players, and for very different reasons. Short has shown premium potential in the past, but his season this year has just been really hard to get a grip on. Some weeks it looks like he's going to go on a tear and go 130, and then some weeks it looks like he's struggling to even get to a 30. Richmond just look like a team where they can't figure out what their identity is. They have a very fluid game plan, and because of that, I don't think I could really go there in any confidence. Salem, however, has shown a very consistent role, and when you're getting that kind of 50-50, 60-40 split between defense and midfield, it does open up a lot of avenues to be able to score. He had a very big spike score on the weekend against St Kilda, who are known to be a friendly matchup for players that can just roam the ground, rack up the uncontested possessions, really just get off the chain. His next 2 are okay, but it's Fremantle at Alice Springs, so it could be a bit, you know, dewy, damp, very hard to get those +6s. Salem's not afraid of getting in there to get a tackle, so I wouldn't be overly stressed. And then the week after, they come up against Collingwood, who are still fairly depleted, and we saw what Freo were able to do across their half-back line. We saw Jordan Clark and Luke Ryan both go absolutely huge against them on the weekend. For that reason, he's probably the one that I would say, look, I think in a 2-week block, you can make 100K off of him, with the fact that his break-even, I think, is 47 this week, and there's potential that he goes 85, 90 for the next 2 weeks. That's 60, 70K. You flip him at round 14. I'm not opposed to that. But really, like, do yourself a favor. Just go into DFS. Look at the line that you're trying to find someone for. Look at the positional classification, because they have that for all the players now. And find the one that sits. Like if you want to find a key forward, for example, that you think could kick a bag of 5 or 6 the next 2 weeks, like let's say you want to take a punt on a Jake Waterman who has St Kilda and North Melbourne in the next 2 weeks.
Ooh.
It could be a creative way to kind of take value and make 100K that way.
Yeah, so you mentioned a few moments ago a player like a Lockie Whitfield, of all the quote unquote premium options that are sitting out this week, he's probably the most desirable to move on based on the top end scoring options we've got in every single line. You're probably not looking to move a Dunkley or a Goulden off. Certainly not thinking about a Zorko, a Heaney. I'd be interested to see what someone would do with moving off Zorko. Don't know why, but I'd be interested to see what you'd be looking at through there. But Whitfield certainly feels like the one where you go, man, I could get a better option at a cheaper price. And so you do have a few guys through there. You make some money off of Sicily. You make some money off of Salem. Short does feel like a roller coaster of volatility that could pay off is there. You make some money off of Will Day if you've got some DPP with a Closey or a Bonner type, let alone anything else that you might have available. If you were to move out of Whitfield, I know I've just listed about 5 names for you there. Who is the kind of player based on fixture, based on cash generation, that really you're looking at jumping off at round 15? Who's the guy that for you feels the most, I just need you for 3 weeks. I'm looking for a date. I don't want to fall in love.
Yeah.
Who are the kind of options that you want to do that if you're looking for just a 3-week good time?
I mean, if you're looking for a 3-week
Is
good
it
time,
Salem?
it might. The issue with Salem is that it's only a 2-week. And that's where I really struggle to kind of find and recommend him as being an option if you're looking to go that way. It's really hard because there's a team that has a player that has a really good 3-week stretch for their position. And unfortunately, there isn't one this year that really stands out. Like last year, the Pies had a really nice 3-week block. You could have jumped onto a Tom Mitchell, and he was absolutely massive for any coach that jumped onto him through the buys. Realistically, if you're calling someone like Whitfield, what I'd be looking to do is I'd look to say, look, I'm going to get rid of Whitfield this week. I'm going to get rid of 2 medium to high price rookies, be it someone like a Harley Reid or, can't even think of one at the moment off the top of my head. Yeah, even like a Closey or a Graham, or someone like that, or a Howes.
Garcia,
and you say,
something,
I want to call Lockie Whitfield. I want to call 2 of these rookies, and I'm going to go down to a rookie. Say it's like a McAuliffe, and I'm going to get 2 of these 700K options. One of them I can trade out during the buys, and one of them I want to hang on to a bit longer. So it might be say, I want to go for a Salem, and I'll just ride it for 2 weeks, and I'll go for a Will Day and hold him until round 17, round 18, and then assess how the landscape looks. That's how I would be looking at it if I was looking to trade something like a Lockie Whitfield out this week.
Yeah. So I think there's an interesting spot that teams are in, and this is a shorter episode than normal for a number of different reasons. But one of them is it feels like you're making moves this week that are preparation for future moves, almost more than anything else. Although you're making moves that are hopefully improving your team for this week, it very much is the upgrade cadences and hoped play of what you can do over the next month. And certainly would encourage you, if you haven't already, map out the trade moves of what your team looks like over this next month in terms of who your upgrade targets, how are you going to get there, who are the in and outs that are going to get you through there. You might not know the exact downgrade names, but you want to target the upgrades and the players that you're jumping off. If you haven't done that yet, you definitely need to do that, and that should inform the moves you make this week. But I think coaches are in an interesting spot. Not only are they looking, MiniMonk, for creative trade moves, they're also in a dilemma point where they've got a decision to make. I've got some topped up cash cows. I've got some red dots that have done nothing for weeks, potentially even months, and won't be coming back to help you over the next few weeks. And then I've got some poor performers in my team, guys that I'd hoped to get even close to premium territories and not even getting there. Can you help coaches through that dilemma? Should they prioritize the poor performer, the topped out cow, or the dead cow? Depending on where their team's based, what should the priorities be?
Look, if you're getting to struggling to get to 18 or 19 playing this week, it has to be the dead cows. It's really hard this week because we don't have many rookies that are coming through the pipeline that we can jump onto and say they're good enough to, get a 50 or a 60. They're going to play for a consistent period of time. The biggest one that stands out to me is a Kane McAuliffe, because I don't think a lot of coaches have gone there yet. I haven't looked at who's the most. If I look at the most popular ins in terms of rookies this week, it's McAuliffe, it's Fraser, then it's Harrison at third, because of the fact that he had that pop score and he does seem to have some security, but I don't love it. He did have to kick, I think it was 3 goals on the weekend to get to that score, which he's not really going to do every week. But I think if you're looking for a rookie to go to, it's definitely Fraser or Ken McAuliffe. But yeah, if you're struggling to get to 19, 20 green dots, you have to fix the red dots first.
Sure.
Then it's a very interesting conundrum between the poor performers and the topped out rookies, because they could be at a very similar price. Jack McRae is only 100K more than Harley Reid is at the moment. That's 140K. But I'd almost rather keep Harley Reid than keep Jack McRae, because at least Harley Reid isn't going to go down in price that fast. And at least we know what his role is going to be on any given week. And that's where it comes in. If you've got a reason as to why the player had a poor performance and you think that they can bounce back to being what they were before that point, that's when I would look to hold on to them. But if you haven't seen anything that convinces you, a la a Jack McRae, who has been, I think poor is probably an understatement. He looks a shell of himself. He doesn't have a role that we can confidently say is that we would want from a player. I would consider moving them on the topped out rookie.
Yeah, okay. So what's coming with this next wave of cash cows for us? We have Wednesday evening. This is being recorded on a Tuesday, so the mid-season draft is happening Wednesday evening. I know there's some hope that we'll get a Jai Newcomb or a John Noble or a something that will come and save us. And it's probably a Richmond or North Melbourne draftee that are the most likely to get opportunities that could score anyway, and be fieldable options. So those, we'll wait and see what happens Wednesday evening to see if that provides any relief. But we know teams that once their year is done, they do start to give kids opportunities. And I think we know what the top 10 to 12 teams are for this year now. The top 8 certainly far from locked, which is great for the AFL and makes it a little bit harder. But we know North are going to keep experimenting and giving a couple of kids either prime opportunities or move the magnets a little bit, which might make you, as if you're thinking of trading into Fisher next week, might make you feel a little bit nervous. We know some teams will start to drop off as the season goes on and to go, right, have a couple of games, kids. Do you see any of the next wave of cash cows? Are there any kids on the horizon that you go, if you're listening to this podcast, he might not play this week, but it should be in the next couple? Is it a Clay Hall from West Coast that is the one we can have confidence in, or are there others?
Clay Hall is one that is interesting. I don't know how he goes. By all accounts, he does okay in the waffle, but he doesn't really blow the socks off by the sounds of it. Ari Schoenmakers continues to tear up the VFL, and St Kilda need to try something different, because it's clearly not working to them so far.
And Bonner was not great on the weekend.
No, he wasn't. It's only taken about 12 weeks for a lot of people to realise that. Maybe his coach as well.
Port Adelaide, Bonner, they're all right.
Yeah, I think that he's very much a one-trick pony. He does one thing very well, and he does a lot of things not so well.
Sure.
But if you look at the other teams that might throw some experimentation in, I think Hawthorn have started to do that. They tried with Cashodia, and he's been very good for them, key forwards.
That's true.
They might do something else in there. I don't know where. Adelaide, maybe, but I just don't know. Like, you're trying to look for these rookies that not only are going to come into the teams, but that actually can have a decent role and get an extended crack at it. And that's why Richmond seems like the likely target at this stage, because their midfield is so depleted. Yes, the troops are going to start coming back, but they need to try some people out in other roles as well. West Coast, I think that they are starting to find a bit of a niche with how their team functions. It's the teams then that are starting to kind of regress back. And I think that, maybe the cliff has come for Geelong. They haven't looked great the last 4 weeks. Maybe if they lose 2 or 3 more, they throw the towel in and say, let's bleed some kids. Let's try to rebuild on the run as we are at the moment. Maybe that's what's the other team I'm thinking of right now? Maybe that's a Brisbane as well. Maybe they try and say, look, we need to try and see what someone looks like off the halfback flank for us. Try and get some run in there because we don't have Kadeem Coleman. We don't have Ashcroft. We don't want to rely on a Dane Zorka who's 33 years old to be our only driver for halfback flank and then lose when he's shut down by the opposition. Maybe that's where it comes from, but it's really hard to see the exact names, but I think those are the teams that I'd be trying to look for and see what we get.
The good news is they will arrive. And at some point, we will get a bunch of options that should have, certainly out of the buys, should have no place on your field. In a best 22 scenario, they might get stuck there with an emergency that has to come on the field with you missing a laid out or something like that. But certainly it shouldn't be anything that ends up needing to be on field. I do want to ask you one last question before we wrap up this episode. A little bit of a speculative guess, I suppose we could ask. Every single year, and I didn't prep him for this if you're listening or watching to this, so this could be interesting. Every single year in the final 8 to 10 weeks of a season, a player has a significant role change and ends up scoring like a premium on the run home for us. Historically, it's been a player like an Aaron Hall, who it hadn't worked in the role. The club need to do something. They make the flip, and all of a sudden they score incredibly well. I can go through year upon year, and there's multiple ones of these sort of players and prospects. It's hard to project and predict. That's my qualifier before you give us some reading of the tea leaves, and it might be more of a team than a specific player. But if you want to have a crack at that, I'll let you go there too. Is there anyone that you think, and maybe draft coaches in AFL Fantasy feel a little bit safer to do it and take the plunge, but is there someone for you that you go, they might be able to, in the forward line, give you an 80 for the next 10 weeks? In the back line, they could go 85 for you in the next little bit. Is there anything that you see, MiniMonk, on the horizons? You've won yourself a couple of hats, and sometimes these sort of players can just tip you over the line. The
big one that
reactions?
The gut reaction is the one that we talked about earlier on in the episode, which was Will Day. I genuinely think he could be a top 8 midfielder from here until the end of the season, and I think that that's something that's worth considering given his price tag. If I keep scrolling down the list, I'm kind of going by the price brackets, looking what they've scored last week, looking what they've scored in their last 3 weeks. Oh man, it's
not pretty.
It's not easy. And this is one of the hardest parts about fantasy, is finding these players before everyone else does, because it really can make the difference between whether you finish, if you're gunning for a hat, it can be the difference between finishing 150th and finishing 50th or even 30th. Like, it's not that many points that you have to make up in order to actually be the winning coach. Look, one that could be a bit of an interesting pod is actually looking at the Carlton backline. With Zach Williams moving into the forward line, I don't mind having a look at someone like a Mitch McGovern or even a Nick Newman as well. I know Nick Newman's a bit more expensive, so he's not really the top of value, but McGovern has shown a propensity to get off of the chain when he can get involved in a lot of those kick marks, and he does get a fair share of the kick-ins as well. So he could be one that's worth looking at. If I go even further down the list, look, one that I know a lot of people have been umming and ahhing about, and it's very much dependent on what his role is in the team any given week, and I thought that Ridley coming back would hurt him, but Nick Hind has been a very interesting player the last 3 weeks to look at, because I think he was sub a couple of weeks ago. 4 weeks ago, he was a sub. Came back with an 87 against GWS, 49 against North Melbourne, but then 110 against Richmond on the weekend. He's one who could get off the absolute chain. Oh, man. I know that there's... I guess
there's a sigh before it. Oh, this will be good.
Yeah, look, it's... I mean, if Lockie Whitfield is going to be confined and not allowed to get off the chain, then maybe Harry Himmelberg gets a bigger piece of the pie as well. And I guess the other one I would look at, and actually I probably should have gone here a bit earlier, but it's in terms of discounted premiums, LDU has looked much better the last 5 weeks. Much better as a player.
Fixture is really good now for them. Certainly over the final sort of 6 weeks of the year, it looks good, but it's pretty good after next week. So if you're already a Tom Green owner and you're looking for an option under 850K, could do worse.
Yeah, I think those probably the big two that I'd be probably the 3 players that people are looking at off the buy would be a Tom Green, an LDU, and probably a Fisher.
Agree.
Maybe a Goulden, maybe
at the value end.
Yeah, at the value end. But like
Sorko for those at the top end.
LDU is someone who you could really get on a tear. And we've seen it before. Like he's had a stretch of a 6-week, 8-week block where he's been able to go at a 120 marker. And if you can do that from, the back end of the season, maybe have the occasional spike score as well, which you can cut a vice captaincy on, you could be off to the races.
Yeah, as a unique, that could really get you back into either a quote-unquote respectable end-of-year rank, or if, again, you're trying to create separation from the pack at the top end and get really aggressive, that definitely could be one. Hey, mate, as always, an absolute pleasure talking AFL fantasy with you. As always, mate, thank you for joining us on this episode.
It's good to be back on.
It definitely is. If you want to go and check out this episode, whether it be on YouTube, for example, you can comment below and let us know what are the 3 trades you're making this week in AFL Fantasy. I'd love to know what they are. If you haven't followed us and subscribed over on YouTube, it's not too late. It's a click of a button and turn those notifications on. So as soon as a video drops, you are notified straight away. If you listen to these on audio podcast, wherever you choose to do it, make sure you've subscribed, given it a 5-star rating. And if you happen to do this over on iTunes, you can leave a review. If you leave one, I'll read it out for you next week on the podcast. Even if it's not a good one, I'll have a laugh at it. And that's a good enough reason. You can follow us and get all the details where you can keep in touch with all the members of the coaches panel in the description of this episode across social media. And in there is also the links to become part of our Patreon fan group. You get access to a bunch of additional podcasts, hidden group rewards, hidden access, and a bunch of different other rewards. I can guarantee you there is a tier that is right for you. And if you've loved the content that you've got from the coaches panel throughout the 2024 season or the preseason, for as simple and as little as $2 a month, it's just one of those nice little give back ways that you can get involved, and we'll give you some extra content during the season just for doing that, let alone what's going to come in the off season of 2024. Yep, I've said that word. Can you tell how my year is gone? I've said the word off season 2024. Hey, good luck this week. Don't forget, best 18, 4 teams are missing, 3 trades available. I hope things go well for you this week. I hope that brave trade moves you make set yourself up for the coming weeks and pay off for you massively in this round of fantasy footy. Good luck, and we'll chat to you next week for another AFL Fantasy Strategy Roundtable.